watering down your strength with reps and fatigue. Sounds a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it? Like, you'd think more is always better, right?
Yeah.
But our deep dive today might just turn that idea on its head.
Yeah, you've brought us this fascinating source, Pavel Tsatsouline Power to the People2.pdf. And it really throws down the gauntlet when it comes to conventional strength training wisdom.
Absolutely. So we're diving deep into this material, exploring some pretty radical ideas like how minimizing fatigue might actually be the key to unlocking serious strength gains, and this whole Russian breakthrough in workout cycling, which I have to admit sounds intriguing.
And our mission here, as always, is to break it all down, make sense of these potentially game-changing concepts, and see which insights resonate most with you.
All right, so let's ditch the image of those marathon gym sessions, grinding out endless reps till you're completely wiped. This deep dive takes us down a different path, a surprisingly simple and, dare I say, minimalist approach to strength training. It's about quality over quantity, about harnessing the power of your nervous system.
Definitely. And right out of the gate, this source really challenges the whole high-rep dogma. It makes a pretty strong case that going beyond 5 reps per set can actually hinder strength development.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. Why is that the central argument here?
Well, one of the big things they highlight is the kind of fatigue that kicks in when you're pushing those higher rep ranges, especially with lighter weights. See, those smaller stabilizing muscles, the ones that help keep your joints safe and your form on point, they tend to tire out way faster than the big prime mover muscles.
So it's almost like the foundation gets shaky before the powerhouse is really ready to give out.
Exactly, and that's where the risk comes in. Because if those stabilizers fatigue prematurely, you're basically trying to perform the exercise in a less stable, less controlled state, which can dramatically increase your chance of injury.
That makes perfect sense. And it reminds me of, how the source brings up that example of pec tears. Apparently, bodybuilders who often favor higher reps experience more pec tears than powerlifters who are used to training with those heavy weights for fewer reps.
Right, it really underscores how the type of training you do can influence the types of injuries you're more susceptible to.
There's also this idea of rigor mortis, and I have to admit, that's a pretty vivid term in this context. What's the point they're making with that analogy?
It might sound dramatic, but it's a really effective way to emphasize that burning sensation, that feel the burn mentality that's often associated with high rep training, doesn't necessarily translate to the kind of deep functional muscle tone that people are often striving for.
So that burn, it might feel good in the moment, but it's not the most accurate indicator of true strength or tone.
Precisely. The author is suggesting that genuine muscle tone, that firmness and definition, it comes more from those neurological signals that keep your muscles engaged and the overall tension within the muscle fibers themselves. It's about teaching your nervous system to create and maintain that tension, not just exhausting the muscle through a high volume of work. So the brain you feel is more a sign of metabolic stress, not necessarily that sculpted look.
Okay, so we're debunking the myth of the burn. So then, what are the real advantages, the clear-cut benefits of sticking to those heavy, low reps that this source really champions?
Well, the source lays out 3 key reasons why they consider this heavy, low-rep approach the safer and more effective path to building strength. And the first one, we've already touched on it, is about injury prevention. By keeping that rep count low, you're minimizing the risk of pushing past that point where those crucial stabilizing muscles start to fatigue significantly. So you're essentially reducing that window for potential injury.
So it's a built-in safety mechanism in a way.
Exactly. And secondly, when you're lifting heavy, you just naturally have to be more focused, more precise in your form. You can't be sloppy with a weight that truly challenges you. So that heightened awareness, that more controlled movement pattern, also acts as a safety measure.
It forces you to pay attention.
Right. And the third reason, this one I find really fascinating, is that the source proposes that heavy, low reps have this kind of tonic energizing effect on your nervous system. Instead of feeling drained and depleted after your workout, it can actually leave you feeling invigorated, more powerful, and resilient overall.
So it's like a nervous system boost instead of a drain. I like the sound of that. Now, the source makes a pretty bold claim that strength training and training for that defined, toned look, they're not actually separate goals. It argues that heavy lifting is the most effective way to achieve both. Are we talking about those coveted steel glutes and chiseled triceps definition here too?
Absolutely. That's one of the core tenets of this philosophy.
Yeah.
The idea is that when you're consistently challenging your muscles with significant loads, you're driving those neurological adaptations that increase the baseline level of tension within those muscle fibers. And it's that constant state of higher tension that contributes to that firm, defined look we call tone.
So it's like building strength and sculpting the physique happen simultaneously.
Exactly. You don't need separate sets of lighter exercises just for shaping or toning. The very act of building strength through those heavy lifts takes care of the aesthetic goals as well.
I'm starting to see the appeal of this less is more approach. Now, this emphasis on minimizing fatigue really seems to be a cornerstone of this whole training philosophy. Why is it so important?
Well, the idea is that by strategically minimizing fatigue during your training, you create a much more favorable environment for your body to adapt and go stronger in the long run. And this is where the recommendation for incredibly low set numbers comes in.
Often they're suggesting just 2 work sets per exercise, right?
Yeah, and coupled with those significantly longer rest periods between sets, it allows your nervous system and your muscles to fully recover before you hit that next bout of intense effort. So you can bring maximum force and maintain perfect form on every single rep. It's all about that quality of effort over just sheer quantity of work.
And there's even a suggestion to pause. Take a moment of relaxation between individual reps within a set. I have to admit, this goes against the no pain, no gain mentality that a lot of us have been conditioned to believe in.
It might seem counterintuitive, but the logic behind that brief pause and relaxation between reps ties back to that focus on quality. It's like a reset button. You're taking that short breather to ensure that you can approach the next rep with maximum focus and tension, making sure that each individual repetition is performed with perfect form and effort.
It's like a mini recovery within the set itself.
Exactly. You're preventing that cumulative fatigue from compromising your form and effort as you move through the set.
That's a really interesting perspective. Now let's delve into those neurological aspects, because the source outlines 5 key conditions for this high-tension training, and the nervous system seems to play a major role. Can you walk us through those 5 conditions?
Absolutely. So these 5 conditions are kind of like the recipe for maximizing those strength gains according to this philosophy. First, there's the slow exercise performance, and it's not about moving at a snail's pace. It's about maintaining that perfect control and squeezing the most muscle engagement possible throughout the entire range of motion.
So it's deliberate, controlled movement.
Exactly. And then the second condition is all about maximizing muscular tension, actively flexing and squeezing those muscles throughout the lift. It's about being intensely present in those working muscles.
So really feeling those muscles work.
Absolutely. And the third condition is all about using heavy weights, specifically in that 85 to 95% of your 1-rep max range, at least part of the time. Yeah. You got to challenge those muscles with significant loads to trigger those strength adaptations.
Makes sense. So we're not shying away from heavy lifting here.
Not at all. And fourth, as we've been discussing, it's minimizing that fatigue, ensuring that every single rep is performed with maximum quality. And the fifth, and this one gets really interesting, is taking advantage of those neurological phenomena.
Yeah, let's dive into that. We've got terms like feed-forward tension, disinhibition training, and irradiation being thrown around. It almost sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Well, the really cool part is how this source takes these complex neurological concepts and connects them to very practical, actionable training advice, like feed-forward tension, for example. It's also known as France's third commandment of powerlifting. And it's all about creating that state of full body tightness and rigidity before you even start the lift. Imagine bracing yourself just before someone pushes you. It's that kind of anticipatory tension.
So it's almost like pre-activating the muscles.
Yeah. And they even talk about tricking your feedback loop, which is your body's natural response to stress, through techniques like virtual lifting.
Okay, virtual lifting, how does that work?
So it's about mentally rehearsing the lift, visualizing it with perfect form and maximum effort. By internalizing that feeling of strength, ignoring distractions, you can actually prime your nervous system for the real thing. It's like a mental warm-up on steroids.
Wow, I like the idea of tricking my nervous system into being stronger. Now, what about irradiation? That one sounds intriguing too.
So irradiation in this context refers to the phenomenon where the tension you create in those muscles directly involved in the lift can actually spread and activate surrounding muscles, even ones that don't seem directly related.
Okay, so the tension radiates outwards.
Exactly. There's a great example in the source about forcefully tensing the muscles in your forearms, even when you're just lifting a relatively light weight with your hand. It can actually increase the strength and endurance of your individual finger muscles.
It's all connected.
Absolutely. It just shows you how interconnected our muscles really are.
Absolutely.
Now, getting back to the bigger picture, this whole approach is very much about cutting through the clutter and focusing on what truly works. The source uses the term simplex to describe it. What does that look like in a practical sense?
Right, so simplex, less is more.
Exactly. The simplex approach is about stripping strength training down to those brutally effective essentials. It's about ditching those convoluted routines and zeroing in on the fundamental exercises and techniques that deliver the biggest bang for your buck. It's like that master chef who can create a mind-blowing dish with just a handful of top-notch ingredients.
I like that analogy. So, how do you address specific muscle groups or problem areas if you're adhering to this minimalist simplex approach?
Well, that's the beauty of it. It's about smart training, not excessive training. Instead of adding a bunch of exercises to target specific muscles, the recommendation is to get more mileage out of the basic drills you're already doing. It's about maximizing the versatility of those key movements.
Okay, so working smarter, not harder.
Precisely. By making small tweaks to your grip, your stance, or even the angle of movement in basic exercises like squats, presses, and rows, you can actually shift the emphasis and put a greater load on those target muscles without needing to learn a whole new set of exercises.
That's super efficient. Now, the source also cautions against constantly switching things up. Why is that consistency so important?
Well, the argument is that if you're always jumping to the next new program, you never really get the chance to master those foundational movements and allow your body the time it needs to adapt and make those significant long-term gains.
So it's about sticking with something long enough to see those real results.
Exactly. While novelty can be exciting, and I might give you that initial boost, real lasting strength comes from that consistent, focused effort on a core set of exercises. It's about building that solid foundation rather than chasing those fleeting gains.
Now, to ensure you keep making progress over the long haul, the source introduces the concept of cycling or periodization, calling it a Russian breakthrough. What's the core idea behind that?
The concept of periodization is basically a strategic way to avoid the pitfalls of just constantly hammering away at high intensity. Things like plateaus, overtraining, burnout. It's a way to ensure you can keep making progress year after year.
So it's about being strategic with your intensity.
Exactly. It challenges that simplistic idea of just always trying to lift more and more weight. It suggests that sometimes, to move forward, you need to take a step back, incorporate periods of lower intensity or volume.
Almost like recharging your batteries.
That's a good way to put it. These periods of lower intensity give your body and your nervous system the chance to fully recover, rebuild, and become even more primed for those next phases of higher intensity.
So it's like a strategic retreat to come back even stronger.
Right. And the source mentions a few ways to actually implement this cycling, like the linear cycle, where you gradually increase the intensity over time, often while decreasing the volume.
Okay, so kind of a slow and steady approach.
Exactly. And then there's wave cycling, which involves more frequent fluctuations in intensity and volume, like on a weekly basis.
So more of an up and down approach.
Right. And they mentioned variations of wave cycling, like flexible, structured, and step cycles, each with its own way of organizing those patterns of intensity and volume.
Okay, lots of options there. Now let's move on to something I found super intriguing. Power stretching. The source claims that some Eastern European sports scientists actually consider stretching a form of strength training. How does that work?
Well, the idea is that certain types of stretching, when done right, can create a lot of tension within the muscle and connective tissues, and that tension can actually stimulate both muscle growth and strength gains.
So you're not just increasing flexibility, you're actually challenging the muscles.
Exactly. They specifically talk about loaded passive stretches, where you're stretching a muscle while it's under some kind of load, often done between sets of a strength exercise. It's about stimulating that muscle fiber lengthening and increasing flexibility without sacrificing any strength.
That's fascinating. So stretching becomes an active part of the training.
Yes. And they also mention things like shutdown threshold isometrics and fascial stretching, techniques aimed at improving the health and function of those connective tissues that surround the muscles, which can indirectly contribute to strength and performance.
Okay, so stretching becomes a lot more than just touching your toes.
Right. These forms of stretching are about creating that stimulus for adaptation within the musculoskeletal system, much like resistance training itself.
Now, there's a section with a title that's hard to ignore. The Soviet Commando Muscle Building Secret. What's the story there?
So the source shares an anecdote about this Russian trooper who supposedly gained a ton of arm size and strength. We're talking 16-inch arms in a crazy short amount of time, just 2 months.
16-inch arms in 2 months. That's impressive.
Right. And the secret, according to this source, was a high-volume training approach but with deliberately short rest intervals between sets. The claim is that this kind of training protocol really ramps up the body's production of growth hormone and optimizes testosterone levels.
So it's about creating this hormonal environment that's super conducive to muscle growth.
Exactly. They present it as a really intense method, definitely demanding, but with potentially dramatic results.
16-inch arms in 2 months. Who wouldn't be intrigued by that? Now, the source also talks about the legendary strongman Arthur Saxon and his mind-blowing bent press feats. What's the key takeaway from that example?
Well, the story of Arthur Saxon regularly bent pressing his two brothers, who combined weighed over 300 pounds overhead with just one arm, it's meant to show just how extraordinary strength can be when you train in ways that go beyond just lifting weights up and down.
So it's about mastering these complex full-body movements.
Exactly. The bent press, they describe it as this more extreme full-body version of the side press. It just highlights the potential for developing crazy strength through methods that you might not find in your typical gym routine.
Strength outside the box. Now let's talk about the elephant in the gym. Machines versus free weights. This source definitely doesn't hold back its opinion.
Nope. It's pretty clear. Machines are the wuzz's way out. It makes a really strong argument for sticking to free weights, claiming they're essential for building real functional strength because they work a much wider range of muscles, including all those stabilizers we talked about earlier, and they demand a lot more from your central nervous system.
So free weights for the win.
According to this source, absolutely. They even quote the legendary powerlifting coach, Louis Simmons, who noticed that bodybuilders who mainly train on machines often underperform in powerlifting because they haven't developed that central nervous system strength that comes from using free weights.
Interesting. So it's not just about the muscles themselves, it's about how your nervous system learns to control those muscles.
Precisely. Now, there's also this intriguing concept of power breathing, introduced as a karate secret for super strength. I'm curious, how does breathing factor into lifting weights? Power breathing, as described in the source, is about strategically syncing your breathing with different phases of your lifts, inhaling deeply during the eccentric or lowering phase, and then exhaling forcefully through those sticking points in the concentric or lifting phase.
So you're using your breath to help power through the lift.
Exactly. And it's not just about the inhales and exhales. They emphasize maintaining a tight, braced core throughout the entire lift and even using the anal lock, a forceful contraction of those pelvic floor muscles to further increase core stability.
The anal lock. Well, that's a technique you don't hear about every day.
It might sound unusual, but it's all about maximizing that force transfer and stability. Now, here's another thing they advise against. Isolation exercises. They actually call them Frankenstein's choice. What's the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, I was surprised to see them be so anti-isolation exercises.
Well, it all comes back to that idea of irradiation we talked about earlier. The argument is that those compound exercises, the ones that involve multiple joints and muscle groups working together, they just provide a much bigger overall strength stimulus.
Because the tension spreads to those surrounding muscles.
Exactly. Isolation exercises, on the other hand, they only work one muscle in isolation, so they miss out on the benefits of that interconnectedness.
It's about training the body as a whole unit.
Right. They call it an anti-isolation approach, focusing on creating that global muscular tension. And they believe it helps with overall stability and reducing your risk of injury.
So we're focusing on those big compound movements. And the source highlights the side press and the floor press as examples of really effective exercises within this framework. What makes the side press so valuable?
Well, the side press, it really embodies so many of those principles we've been discussing. It's not just about pressing weight overhead. It forces you to engage your entire body.
So it's more than just an arm exercise.
Way more. It works your deltoids, of course, but it also brings in those stabilizers in your midsection, your grip, your rotator cuff. Because you're lifting a relatively long lever arm on just one side of your body, it really challenges your core stability and teaches you to efficiently transfer force throughout your entire system.
It's like a full-body symphony.
Right. And the source also points out that it encourages proper engagement of your lats, those big armpit muscles, which is crucial for shoulder stability.
And, of course, no conversation about strength training, especially one focused on foundational movements, would be complete without mentioning the deadlift. How does the deadlift fit into this philosophy?
Well, they definitely don't shy away from singing its praises. The deadlift is presented as a true king among exercises, especially if you're aiming for those steel glutes. It works so many muscles throughout your entire body, from your grip all the way up to your upper back.
So it's the ultimate full-body exercise.
Pretty much. And they also touch on a few variations, like the Romanian deadlift, which really targets those hamstrings and glutes, the duck deadlift, which emphasizes those quads in different ways, and the snatch pull, which is great for building your lats and upper back.
It sounds like the deadlift is the foundation of this whole approach.
It's definitely a cornerstone.
Right.
And regardless of which variation you choose, the source emphasizes the absolute importance of maintaining impeccable form during the deadlift. You're often dealing with very heavy weights, so proper technique is crucial for staying injury-free.
We've covered a ton of ground here. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what would you say are the most crucial takeaways from our exploration of Power to the People 2.pdf?
Well, if I had to distill it down to the core principles, I'd say this. Prioritize training with lower reps and heavier weights for both strength and that sculpted physique. Focus intensely on minimizing fatigue during your workouts. That means fewer overall sets, longer rest periods, even those brief pauses between reps.
So it's about working smarter, not necessarily harder.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And actively engage your nervous system, maximize that muscular tension, and even use mental strategies to prime yourself for those lifts. Concentrate on those big, fundamental exercises that work multiple muscle groups at once.
Like the deadlift.
Exactly. And think about incorporating cyclical training strategies to keep those gains coming. Explore different ways of stretching that actually contribute to your strength gains. And above all else, maintain that full body tension and focus on perfect form to get the most out of your training while staying injury-free.
I'm really feeling inspired to simplify my training and focus on those fundamentals. Maybe mastering the deadlift is the key, who knows? It's certainly given me a lot to think about. And for anyone who's as intrigued by this approach as I am, you can definitely find a lot more info from the author Pavel Tsatsouline in his other books and training materials. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of strength.